But visual mode doesn't give you everything that you would want built in. There's kind of a problem with visual mode as well, and that is it's very, very useful for those of us who think visually, but in order to do some kind of manipulations, the only way you can do them is to get into visual mode, yank some text, for example, and as soon as you do the yank, you may have noticed it stopped being in visual mode anymore. It's now no longer in visual mode, it's now gone back to being in normal mode. So I had to move around, find where I wanted to put the text, and then I needed to paste it, and hopefully it gets pasted in the right place. So for example, here's my table again. I go in and I select some text that I'm interested in, and then I delete it, and then I go back and I say, well, I want to put it in there, and of course I hit the wrong key and it went in the wrong place and things have gone all horribly, horribly wrong. So because I want to do that kind of manipulation very frequently, I created a plugin, which is in the tarball, called Drag Visuals. And the idea is I ought to be able to stay in visual mode, but just move that chunk of visual mode text around in any way that I want to. So with that module in place, we can again select the text that I want, and now using the arrow keys, I can do this. I can just drag it around and line it up wherever I want it to be, and indeed I can even drag it up and down if that's what I want to do until it's exactly where I want it, and I'm still in visual mode the whole time. So if there's anything else I want to do at that point, I can still do it. I could, for example, indent or outdent it using the arrow keys as well. That's the Drag Visuals module, which is available from the tarball. It's kind of useful in unusual circumstances. So if you find yourself writing comments that are sort of like this with nice boxes around them, then eventually, if you're like me, you'll realize that looks horrible because it's not actually lined up, centered on the box properly. So what you can do is you can simply select the text you're interested in, and using Drag Visuals, you can do that. You can just line it up exactly where you want it, and it turns out to be a pretty handy feature. So I'd suggest you have a look at that plugin. If you like the visual modes, this might make you like them even more. The module doesn't come with an API as such. There's no interface. It doesn't map any keys, because I don't know what keys you wanted to use. For myself, I use my arrow keys when I'm in visual mode, so I set up VMaps to map those 4 arrow keys to drag left, drag right, drag down, drag up. If you're an arrow key user to navigate, then you've probably got your H, J, K and L keys free, and you could use them for that as well. Or you could just set up 4 function keys, whatever works for you best. My absolute favorite feature of this plugin, however, is another tool which allows you to set up a key mapping to duplicate a block and then move it around because you've got the other keys set up. The use of this is something like this. So here I've got a series of variable names, and I'd like to initialize them to effectively their own name. So I could sit there and type in equals, double quote, cust ID, double quote, etc., or I could do this using the plugin. I simply say, okay, I've mapped the D key to duplicate one of these. I hit the D key, and now I've got a copy of it. I can lay it out wherever I want, and then I can say, okay, now with that block, before the block, I want to insert, and now we go into insert mode, and I want to insert the assignment half of that. And the lovely thing about insertions when you're in block mode is they apply to every line. You do it on one line, you get it on every line. Now, once again, I need to fill in all of those terminal quotes, and I could do it just by doing a big A append on every line, but it's actually much easier just to say I'm going to reselect the previous selection. I'm going to use a $sign to extend the previous selection to the very end of each line, and then I'm literally just going to append another double quote, and it just does it on each of the lines with the appropriate indentation. So if I'd just done that straight out, I guess you can see I could make that particular set of code very much quicker just with 3 simple operations. Have a look at the plugin, see if it's right for you. One final aspect of visual mode that can be somewhat annoying, but is very easy to fix, is that whenever you do an operation in visual mode, it does the operation and then jumps out of visual mode and back into normal mode. And about half the time that's exactly what you want. You've done some operation like deleting something and you want to be back in normal mode again. But the other half of the time it's exactly what you don't want. For example, in an earlier instance, I was using the arrow keys to take a visual block and move it in and out, change its indent. But the problem normally in visual mode is that as soon as you do one of those arrow keys, it jumps out of visual mode and you get to do one indent and then you're out of visual mode, so you have to reselect before you can do the next indent. So a typical example of that would be something like this, where I realize, you know what, I want to indent that across so it all lines up nicely. And I do an indent and it does one indent, but now I'm back in normal mode again. So what do I have to do? I have to get back in and indent, and I'm back in normal mode again. And I have to get back in and indent, and finally I get it. And no one is going to do that. Obviously you don't do that. You have to come up with another way of getting the indentation right, because that's just too annoying for words. There is a way of reselecting what you just had selected very easily. It's GV in normal mode. If you're in normal mode and you say GV rather than V, then it simply reselects whatever code block or set of lines you had selected previously automatically. But it turns out that in some kinds of commands, like the shifting left and shifting right commands, you'd rather stay in visual mode as long as necessary to get the kinds of shifting that you want. So if you go to your vimrec and add some code like this, and again, this is in the tarball, so you don't need to try and copy it down now. Basically what I'm doing is I'm doing the following. I'm saying when I'm in visual mode and I do either a left shift or a right shift operation, which is of course the two arrow keys like this, then I want you to call a function. And what do I want that function to do? I want the function to do the shift that's required and then do a GV automatically to put me back in. So the very act of shifting in visual mode does the shift and then jumps me straight back into visual mode again. And if you set something like that up, then you get the following behavior. Once again, we select something that I want to shift across, and look, it stays in visual mode. And again, and again, and again, and again, and back till where I line it up. So it's probably up to each individual editor who likes visual mode to decide which of the visual commands they ought to overload in order to keep themselves in visual mode while that command is still happening. I just showed you for shifting, but the same kind of pattern could be applied for other things. If you can't be bothered, then you can just grab my plugin, the Persistent Visuals plugin, which comes in the tarball, which overloads a very large number of commands within visual mode so that they stay in visual mode, and tries to do it in the most sensible way. So you might be better off, if you like this idea but you're a bit nervous about trying to program Vim directly, grab this, have a look through it, and just remove the V maps for things that you don't want to have persistent.